Even as we grieve, we give thanks for this most faithful life. I am deeply aware of this great inheritance and of the duties and heavy responsibilities.
Inside Buckingham Palace tonight, something unthinkable is happening, and it could quietly reshape the future of the British monarchy. For the first time since his coronation, King Charles is handing final authority on a major royal crisis to his son, Prince William. And the reason he is doing it has everything to do with Queen Camilla, a scandal she never expected, and a public backlash nobody at court can ignore anymore. Before we unpack how Charles has effectively put William in charge, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will change how you see every royal appearance from now on. To understand why this moment is so explosive, you have to go back to the image the palace has carefully built around Camilla over the past decade. Once seen as the other woman, she was gradually rebranded as the loyal partner, the hardworking queen consort, the safe pair of hands standing beside an aging king. But that careful image has been shaken by a series of revelations and missteps that, taken together, have convinced Charles that Camilla can no longer be the one managing the monarchy's most sensitive battles. The scandal that finally tipped things over did not start with a dramatic outburst or a leaked video. It began, like so many royal crises, with what insiders are calling a pattern of poor judgment, tone-deaf alliances, and stubborn loyalty to people the public believes should have been left behind long ago. At the center of that pattern is Camilla's determination to maintain friendships with figures whose names have become toxic in the headlines, even as William has moved to cut them off completely. You've heard some of the names before: Andrew, Sarah Ferguson, and others who appear in unflattering documents and court records connected to the Epstein scandal and other controversies the palace desperately wants to forget. While William has been laser-focused on drawing a bright red line between the crown and anyone linked to those scandals, Camilla has quietly continued lunches, phone calls, and private support, insisting that long-standing friendships should not be destroyed by association alone. For a while, that tension simmered behind closed doors. Charles, ever the man trying to keep the peace, hoped he could rely on his wife's warmth and Kate's professionalism, William's strategy and his own authority, without forcing anyone into a direct confrontation. But then came the moment that royal aides now quietly refer to as the spark, a high-profile engagement in support of abuse survivors that backfired in ways nobody inside the palace can spin away. Camilla, hoping to show that she stood firmly with victims, hosted a very public meeting with campaigners and survivors, including a respected French activist whose story made international headlines. On paper, it was exactly the kind of engagement modern royals are expected to do. But almost immediately, social media erupted with a brutal question. How could the Queen Consort stand with survivors in public while still being personally close to people whose names appear again and again in the very scandals those survivors are fighting against? One viral comment summed up the mood. You can't hug victims with one hand and protect your friends with the other. That line, according to a palace staffer quoted off the record, was the moment William decided the situation had crossed a line that could no longer be managed with polite conversations and private warnings. Up to that point, Charles had tried to balance competing loyalties. He understood his son's determination to protect the institution at any cost, but he also understood his wife's fear of abandoning people she has known for decades. Friends say that in private, Charles has often described himself as standing in the middle of a bridge, with Camilla on one side and William on the other, both insisting the future depends on him stepping fully toward them. But bridges cannot hold forever when the weight on them keeps increasing. Add to that image one more crucial detail: a 77-year-old king battling cancer, whose energy is finite, whose days are scheduled to the minute, and who knows, perhaps more clearly than anyone, that his time to shape the monarchy is limited. According to one long-serving courtier, the combination of Camilla's misjudged optics, Andrew's ongoing shadow, and Charles's health finally forced a decision that had been quietly discussed for months, but never fully acted on. That decision, the courtier said, was simple in principle and revolutionary in practice. Charles would remain king, but William would be given final authority over how the monarchy responds to scandal, reputational threats, and the long-term plan for survival. In other words, when it comes to the question that keeps many Britons awake at night, can this institution still justify itself? The person now calling the shots is not the king, but the heir. And nothing illustrates that shift more clearly than the way the palace has handled the fallout from what people are already calling the Camilla scandal. Instead of letting the Queen Consort's office run its own damage control, William has stepped in with a crisis team drawn from his own staff, from the Royal Foundation, and from trusted external advisors who specialize in corporate turnarounds and political messaging. Their mandate, according to multiple reports, is blunt: protect the crown at all costs, even if that means sidelining the Queen Consort in areas where she once expected to lead. Camilla, say insiders, has not taken this quietly, but the deeper question, the one that matters for the future of the monarchy, is whether Charles has finally accepted that, in this new age, even his marriage must come second to his son's strategy. Because if the answer is yes, then what you are watching right now is more than a family disagreement. It is the quiet transfer of power from a wounded king to the heir who intends to rebuild the institution in his own image. And this is only the beginning. To see how far this has gone, you need to look inside the meetings that no camera ever films, the ones where titles and tiaras suddenly stop mattering and only cold calculations are left on the table. According to several well-placed sources, the turning point came in a closed-door session at Clarence House, when William, Kate, Charles, and Camilla sat down with senior aides to discuss how to contain the outrage over Camilla's perceived hypocrisy. What was supposed to be a strategy discussion quickly became something closer to an intervention. William, usually careful to hide his frustration, arrived with a stack of briefings, screenshots of viral posts, polling data on trust in the monarchy, and timelines connecting various scandals in which the same names kept appearing. One senior staffer later described the atmosphere as shockingly direct. William did not raise his voice, but he did something far more powerful. He drew a straight line between Camilla's private loyalties and the public's collapsing patience with the entire institution. He argued that in an age where every association can be traced, photographed, and shared worldwide in seconds, there is no such thing as a purely private friendship for a queen consort. Either she represents the standards the crown claims to uphold, or she undermines them. Kate, seated beside him, reportedly backed him point by point, focusing less on blame and more on consequences. She spoke about young people tuning out the monarchy, charities hesitating to partner with the royals, and the pain of survivors who feel their stories are being used as props. The message was clear. This is bigger than one friendship, bigger even than one scandal. It is about whether the monarchy is still capable of learning from its mistakes. Camilla pushed back. She reminded them that she had spent years absorbing public hatred, rebuilding her reputation, and standing by Charles through some of his darkest days. She insisted that she would not become the kind of royal who discards people the moment they become inconvenient. In her eyes, loyalty is not a weakness, it is a duty. But William's reply cut through the room like cold air. Loyalty, he said, cannot be selective. You cannot be fiercely loyal to people with stained reputations and then ask the country to believe you are just as loyal to victims seeking justice. At some point, a line has to be drawn, and the person who draws it must be someone the public trusts. That was the subtext running beneath every word. The public trusts William and Kate more than it trusts Charles and Camilla. Charles, sitting between his wife and his heir, was silent longer than anyone expected. People present say you could almost see the conflict playing out behind his eyes. The husband who wants to protect his partner, the father who wants to empower his son, and the king who knows the institution cannot survive another generation of slow, hesitant responses to scandal. When he finally spoke, it was not to scold William or soothe Camilla. It was to announce a new structure. From that point forward, he said, all decisions relating to reputational risk, crisis management, and long-term public trust would be coordinated through William's office. Camilla's team would still be heard, but they would no longer have the final say on how to handle controversies touching her personally. In effect, Charles had just handed his son the power to overrule the queen consort in the very areas where she once expected Charles to defer to her instincts. That is the moment insiders now describe as the quiet transfer of final authority. Charles did not sign an abdication document. He did not give a speech from the throne. Instead, he changed who controls the levers behind the curtain. Since then, every visible move has reflected that change. When statements are released about sensitive issues, the language carries William's fingerprints. Concise, apologetic where necessary, firm about consequences, and always anchored in the idea of accountability. Whenever tough calls have to be made about distancing the family from controversial figures, those calls now originate from Kensington Palace, not from the Queen's office. You can see the contrast most clearly in how Kate and Camilla have been deployed in public. In the weeks after the scandal peaked, it was Kate, not Camilla, who appeared beside William at key engagements dealing with trust, youth, and the future of the country. Camilla's schedule, once packed with high-profile events, subtly shifted towards safer, more traditional duties, arts patronage, small receptions, and charity visits less likely to generate controversy. Officially, this was explained as a natural rebalancing of workloads while the king undergoes treatment. Unofficially, everyone understands what it means. The palace wants William and Kate front and center as the face of reform, while Camilla is quietly moved to the side of the stage. That shift has not gone unnoticed by Camilla herself. Rumors from within the household describe a queen consort who feels wounded, embarrassed, and increasingly isolated, convinced that her decades of service are being written off because of relationships she refuses to end. She is said to resent the way Kate is praised in the press for doing many of the things Camilla has quietly done for years, and to fear that the public will once again cast her as the unwanted figure when a new reign finally begins. For William, however, this is not about personal feelings, at least not primarily. To him, this is about survival. He knows that if the monarchy stumbles through one more scandal without clear, decisive action, the calls to abolish it will no longer be coming from the fringes. They will be coming from the center. That is why his team is treating this moment less like a family squabble and more like a corporate turnaround. They are mapping out who represents the brand, who endangers it, and what has to change to keep it alive. And if that means confronting a queen consort who believes she has earned the right to act on her own instincts, then so be it. Because in William's mind, and increasingly in Charles's, the alternative is not a more comfortable family dinner. The alternative is no crown at all. As uncomfortable as it is to admit, especially for those who still see the monarchy in fairy tale terms, the House of Windsor is now being run on crisis logic, ruthlessly, strategically, and with an eye on a future where the old rules about deference and quiet compromises no longer apply. The question now is not whether Charles has given William this authority. He has. The question is what William plans to do with it next, and how far he is willing to go when even his own stepmother stands in the way of the image he believes the crown must project to survive. Outside the palace walls, the public is already beginning to sense that something has shifted, even if they cannot see the briefing papers and tense meetings. People notice patterns. Who appears on the balcony, who stands in the center of the frame, who gives the speeches that actually acknowledge pain instead of just offering polished phrases about tradition. Increasingly, that person is William. When charities want a royal who can talk convincingly about accountability and mental health, they ask for William and Kate. When foreign leaders push for clarity on what the monarchy stands for in a world of social justice movements and online outrage, it is William who takes the calls and leads the conversations. Charles still signs the documents. Camilla still smiles for the cameras. But the emotional connection, the sense of direction, is flowing through a different pair of hands. That is exactly how William wants it, because he understands that power in the 21st century is not just about crowns and titles. It is about narrative. Whoever controls the story controls the future. That is why the Camilla scandal matters so much. On the surface, it is a question of friendships and optics. Underneath, it is a test of whether the monarchy can finally, truly break with the habits that almost destroyed it during the Diana years. Denial, delay, and a stubborn insistence on protecting the wrong people at the worst possible time. William grew up watching that play out in real time, watching his mother suffer while the adults around her insisted that image came before honesty. He has no intention of repeating that script. So when he looks at the current crisis, he does not just see an awkward situation with his stepmother. He sees a crossroads. Down one path lies a softer approach, one that tries to keep everyone happy and hopes the public eventually moves on. Down the other lies a harsher, cleaner line. No more ambiguity, no more mixed signals, no more private loyalties that contradict public messages. All the evidence so far suggests he has already chosen the second path. For Camilla, that choice feels like a personal rejection. For Charles, it is a painful admission that the crown he waited his whole life to wear is now being reshaped by his son. For the rest of us, it is a rare glimpse into what the next reign will really look like. Not just a change of faces on the balcony, but a change of philosophy. A monarchy that survives by being blunter, faster, and far less forgiving of anyone who drags it back toward the shadows of old scandals. Whether you think that is ruthless or necessary, one thing is clear. By handing final authority to William in the wake of Camilla's scandal, King Charles has done more than solve a short-term crisis. He has quietly confirmed what many suspected all along. The future of the British monarchy now firmly sits in William's hands and not in Charles's anymore.